Today we're going to be changing gears a bit. The source of this class, or the thrust of this class has been to enable you to do your best in taking care of the resources that God gives you. And therefore, you will then follow Scripture and you will treat those resources with respect and with the purpose that God intended for us. But, you know, there's been some things that happen in our culture that sometimes gets in the way of that. And to know how to use the events that are in place in our culture, you sometimes need to understand the rules of the game before you get too far into the game. When you get to be as old as I am, the game's about over. But, you know, I can still go for maybe another score or two. So today we're going to expand what have been looking on to talk about credit ratings, credit reporting agencies, and credit scores. Used to be, back when I was a young person making loan decisions back in the early 1970s, I would sit down and I would interview the applicant. I would ask them about their income and they would tell me their story. And it was a story. I've been on this job of mine that I love so much, and I mean, they would spend a lot of time telling me their story. Then we talk about who they owe, and they talk about who they owed and how long they've had a relationship with them. And then they would talk about if they had problems making payments, what had been the circumstances surrounding those issues. Because I can't think of a single person that hasn't had an issue with their finances at some point in their life, self-included. In fact, I could tell you stories that would almost bring you to tears. They brought me to tears, I can tell you that. But, you know, they'd tell me their story and I would understand. I would listen. And then there was a thing that came about that was called the Retail Merchants Association. The Retail Merchants Association was a group of individuals in communities who would get together and they would keep records of how people paid their payments. And you'd call up the Retail Merchants Association and they would read you everything that they had on file. And you had to be a pretty fast writer because they were talking pretty fast. And you had to fill out a form with everything they said. Because you didn't have a computer to get it on. There were no such things as fax machines that you could have them fax it to you. The way you got it was oral sharing of that information.
Those were the good old days.
Well, they were, you know, I figured this, Paul. Some of them were very good, and some of them weren't so much. Getting the information was good. It helped us validate what we were told. But a lot of times people weren't so diligent in how they handled the information that they got. Remember, the Retail Merchants Association was a group of volunteers. Nobody who worked at the Retail Merchants Association was paid. And the only way they got their information was they would call the people that these folks owed. And if no one had applied for a while and you didn't provide them with a list of creditors, the information you got was one-sided, often very limited, and often filled with mistakes. Fast forward. Today we have 3, some people say 4. I offer that there's probably as many as 5 credit reporting agencies as they're defined by federal law. These are agencies that gather information from merchants, banks, thrifts, all the people that you may owe, and they gather all this information together and they create a database. And up until about 5 years ago, it was cloaked in secrecy. There was a law that prevented people who worked in the financial industry from even discussing with you the contents of the information that they received from the credit reporting agency. And if they turned you down, they did not have to tell you why you were being turned down on your loan. They would get this information. You didn't know what it was. You didn't know who said what, and you couldn't get it. And as many people have since found out, the credit reporting agencies get their information in different formats, and sometimes the information from one format to another is distorted. So it falls back upon actually the person whose report it's about to follow up to make sure the information contained in your credit reports is accurate. There are 3 major credit reporting agencies of credit information. Equifax is one of the largest, TransUnion and Experian. They have their own unique databases. And sometimes in certain industries, they will get a credit report for certain types of loans from all 3, mortgages particularly. They get a credit report from all 3 of the credit reporting agencies, and they will compare the people at the financial institution who's processing your loan request. They will compare the 3 reports, and they now will often have a discussion with the applicant to say, you know, this one says this and this one says that, so can you help me understand the differences? But what is really the crux of this is what's contained in your credit report is used to determine what your credit score is. Now, I said credit score. That's wrong. There are hundreds of different types of credit scores. Credit scores that are used for credit cards, credit scores that are used for automobile loans, credit scores that are used for mortgages, credit scores that are used for high risk types of loans, and those that are used for people who are just entering the credit market. And some of them use a product that was sold by a company called Fair Isaacs and Company. Fair Isaacs and Company is now called FICO. And FICO is sort of like Kleenex. Okay? Kleenex is a brand of facial tissue. What it is not Kleenex necessarily. If you buy Puffs, it's not Kleenex, but it's a facial tissue. But around our house, and I say around most houses, you refer to it as Kleenex. So when I say FICO, I am talking about not the proprietary product or products that this company sells, but about credit scores in general. Okay? Let's sort of get those ground rules out of the way. What is a credit rating for? Well, as I mentioned back in the day, when I was doing these as a very young banker, I wanted to know about length of employment, type of employment, stability of employment. The employment market where you live was something we had to consider. We looked at income, what was reported and what was not reported. Anybody ever work in the hospitality industry? In the food services industry? A lot of income there is unreported. So how do you handle that? Commissions, non-salary type of income such as rental property or business ownerships or investment income, their payment history, the level of income required compared to the payments that are showing up, the mix of credit types, the number of credit inquiries, and the types of inquiries. Now, when I talk about types of credit, there are generally 4 big categories. There's retail finance companies. And I'm not talking about the department stores. I'm talking about what used to be household finance or security finance, but some retail establishments are classified as finance companies. I consider Conn's a retail establishment. They sell goods, they lease goods, they rent goods, but they're considered a finance company when it comes to a credit report. Okay? So you need to find out who's what kind of, and because a finance company on your credit report will hurt your credit report, as opposed to if it comes through a bank. And if it's a credit card issued by a bank, a credit card in that variety has a better addition to your credit rating than one issued by a department store. They are valued differently. There are other types of credit that don't even impact your score. If you have a collection item, you didn't pay it for some reason, or it's reported that you didn't pay it for some reason, and it's under $100, piffle, they don't look at it. They just don't look at it. However, that's in creating the score. But at the financial institution, they may or may not, in their underwriting, they look at more than just the score. They look at the actual report. They may consider that to be something. So you need to be aware of what the practices of your place that you're applying for credit, what their practices are in underwriting. Mortgages are more strictly underwritten because it's a longer term obligation, and their underwriting standards are pretty well uniform, particularly if they are doing business with the federal government. The FHA and HUD have standardized pretty much what they're underwriting, the way they handle things that are adverse. But when it comes to ratio analysis, they're different. VA, FHA operate in totally different ways than Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae loans are done. So you need to understand what you're applying for will impact how your information is handled and how long you've had relationships will be there. Here we have, notice I added check systems. Anybody heard of check systems? Yeah? Check systems reports people who write bad checks or get overdrawn on their checking accounts. Yeah. And guess what? The other three are now collecting that data too. So if you have a hot check out there, in days past, it wouldn't show up in your credit report. It shows there today, and you need to be aware of what it shows. You have now the right to review your credit report. In fact, during COVID, you could review your credit report at the credit reporting agencies as often as you wanted. And I don't know if that has expired yet or not. They're talking about it expiring. And going back to, you can get a credit report once a year from each of the credit reporting agencies, but you can get one from each of them. So you could review one every 4 months. You did one from Equifax, one from Experian, and one from TransUnion, and you cover the gamut. And those are the three that are used in mortgages. Some people use FICO-generated scores. And there's other companies that produce credit scores. Credit Advantage is one of those companies. They're the biggest competitor with FICO, but FICO has, by and large, the largest number of scores. And they've been in it the longest. It's not that old. 1989 was when FICO first did their analysis. FICO, only since 1989. Your book that I gave you was written in 1990. Okay? So a lot of the information I'm giving you is different a little bit from what's in the book because things change over time. Also, financial institutions, oftentimes, if they're substantial in size, they will use their own proprietary credit score. They will put their own analysis into an algorithm, and they will put their own weights into the process. So you've got to have a discussion, particularly if you get denied credit. You want to have a discussion and understand, how are you treating my information differently from how I perceive it when I look at my credit report? So you need to understand that. Some financial institutions are more rigid than others in their underwriting, and some financial institutions are less rigid. And that is not a fixed situation. As their appetite for loan volume changes, their appetite for risk changes, and they will loosen their credit standards a little bit, and all of a sudden they're approving loans that 2 weeks ago they would not approve. And it's all in the way they modify their credit standards. And when interest rates are high, their credit standards tend to loosen a little bit because they want more high yielding assets to put on their books. And when interest rates are low, their credit criteria tends to be more tight unless something else prompts them to be more liberal. In the area of mortgages, there's a thing called the Fair Credit Reporting Act that sort of dovetails in with the redlining rules that people have to follow. Banks who are regulated by the federal government, savings and loans, credit unions, certain mortgage lenders, they have to prove that they're being equitable in where they extend credit. So they get, if the regulator comes in and thinks that they're discriminating on a particular area, they will challenge them to prove otherwise. And if they're not successful in challenging that, they're successful in their defense of that challenge, the Federal Consumer Credit Protection Bureau, the CFPB, will put them under restrictions on what they can do. They may not let them branch where they want to branch. They may not be able to offer new products when they want to have to have approval for new products. But they will also penalize them with fines and assessments. Credit scores are, your credit score is everywhere. Even if you say, well, I'm not going to borrow for where I live. I'm just going to rent. What you pay in rent is directly impacted by your credit score. There's some apartment houses that won't rent to people whose score is below a certain threshold. If you find one that does rent below that threshold, odds are you're going to pay higher rent. And same way with the mortgages. The rate that you see in the newspaper, the one that's on TV, assumes people who are in the best tier of credit scores. And the best tier is defined by the lending institution that's doing the advertising on a given day. You remember when you see these advertisings that have the rate in predominant, you'll see a lot of little white things down at the bottom, the fine print, as they say. And it's in there that they define what is the best level, when this was put together, because they've got to tell you because like I said, they change over time. Whether you can get a car loan for 0% interest or not is determined by your credit score.
Can I ask you something about that? Last time I bought a car on payments, the I financed it through Toyota instead of my credit union because Toyota offered a better rate, interest. So would that have affected my credit score in any way?
The fact that you got it through a finance or through the finance division of a
Toyota.
No, it won't. That they will. The automobile loan industry has become more level. They used to discriminate against things like GMAC, Toyota Finance, Ford Motor Credit, so forth and so on, versus those that got their credit at credit unions or banks or whatever. That's pretty much gone away. But the difference is the 0% is a come on. I'm told there are 14 different ways that an automobile dealership can make money. And 0% interest means they're not going to make it on the finance. So they're going to get it someplace else. Maybe in the price of the car. Maybe in the other things they try to add on or require you to do. Also, certain industries are allowed to charge prepayment penalties. I can tell you this, banks and credit unions are not allowed to charge a prepayment penalty any longer. They used to be able to. And one of the biggest ones was when you borrowed money at a bank, they would gross up your loan. Let's say you went in for $10,000 and they were going to charge you 6%, and that was 6% a year. And that $10,000 would be, maybe if it was a 3-year loan, it'd be like, let's see, 6 times 3 is $1,800 more, so it'd be $11,800. So your prepaid amount of interest was $1,800. But then they would use what's commonly called the rule of 78 to give it back to you if you paid it off early. Rule of 78 is also known by the accountants as some of the month's digits. And the reason that they call it that is 1 through 12 adds up to 78, if you want to add them up. And the first month they would earn 12/78 of the interest. In the second month they would earn 11/78 of that interest, 10/78. So when you're down to the last month paying it off, early really don't get anything because you're only getting 1/78 of the total amount of the prepaid interest. Prepaid interest has pretty much gone away, but they now have explicit, if you pay it off before the 15th month or the 30th month or whatever the contract they can put in, they will charge you a certain percentage of the loan, and they will try to collect that from you. Now, that's negotiable. Read your contracts before you sign them. They're all different. They're all different. Just remember this. It's the follow the money. How many of you ever heard, on police stories, you follow the money? You know, whenever you are dealing with someone loaning you money, follow what their business model says they're trying to do. They're trying to earn a profit from you, okay? And profit is not all bad. If they didn't have profit, they wouldn't have money to loan to people, okay? But there is some organizations that are more profitable than others, and they're profitable because of fees, interest, so forth and so on. So just read your contract, understand what you're getting into, and look out for the pitfalls. Scores are recomputed continually. Used to, back in the days of the Retail Merchants Association, if you only applied for a loan once every 2 years, your credit report was only updated once every 2 years. Today, they generally update your credit file at least twice a month. Every time you have a statement drop on a credit card account, they send in your credit report, what your paying history is. And at the end of the calendar month, they'll send it in again. And if you're late and you're assessed a late charge, they'll send it in again. So it's amazing how many times the computerization has made the information transfer so fast that you really have a hard time picking up upon when it has actually been tallied. Just know this, that your score is changing just as fast as that information comes in. So the score that you have today will not be the score that you have tomorrow unless you're just not doing anything. if you're not doing anything. Now, doing anything. What is doing anything? If you apply for credit, you're doing something, even though you don't actually take the loan. The fact that you had an inquiry changes your credit report, changes your score. Doesn't change what information they've turned in. It's just that people who are looking for credit generally have a little more risk associated with them than those people who are sitting on the sidelines. They're probably going to be able to pay the things that they've already obligated themselves to. If you have a change in your credit limit, even though you didn't ask for it, it changes your credit score. Sometimes better, sometimes worse. Let me give you an example of how it could be better. Part of the credit score is on credit utilization. They take the amount that you owe and divide it by your total limits, and they get a ratio. And when they have this ratio, they say, oh, this person is using less of their available credit, and that impacts the score positively. On the other hand, if you go out there and say, I've got too many credit cards and I want to close one, that fact that you made a conscious decision to get out of debt will hurt your score. Particularly, and they're not all equal. Let's say you've got 5 credit cards. If you've got 5 credit cards and you want to go down to 4, you can close one of them that was opened a year ago, or you can close one that was opened 15 years ago. If you close the newest one, that hurts your credit score less than if you keep the one that's been out there a long time. So you are in control of what happens to your credit score, but you don't know which lever to push. All right? So you need to be thinking about these kinds of things as you go through the process. Elements of the credit score: the type of credit being sought, the payment history, the adverse information, the mix of credit, the length of time you've had a credit file. Those are generally the big ones. But they're not limited to those, okay? They're not limited to those. But for the sake of our discussion, because it can roam all over the world, we're going to try to stay with that. The FICO score, the one that is produced by Fair Isaacs, the one they call FICO 9, it's the most popular version that's used right now. 850 is the highest point. 300 is the lowest point. People will say the highest tier for installment credit, say for a car, you need at least a 720 at some shops, and that could be as high as 800 at some shops, depending on what their appetite is for risk. Remember, the financial institution is looking at loans that they want at a particular price point. And they're picking that price point based upon their perception of risk. The higher your score, the more likely you are to get approved. Financial institution sets limit on the score. This is called grading. We'll talk about that more in detail in just a minute. And grades the grades are not, they're not static. They move from time to time. One that's pretty well held for a while has been the credit score to get a first mortgage. It's still running about 640. If you're going to get a mortgage, you need a credit score of 640. And remember, they use scores from all 3 credit reporting agencies. So you need to know what your score is at each of the credit reporting agencies. And they're going to take the middle one. They don't use the best one. They don't use the worst one. They use the middle one. But they can be significantly different. This is one financial institution's breakout of the impact that they have on their score. They take the payment history. It represents 40% of the score. The credit history, the amount of history that you've got, the length of time you've had credit, that's that 21%. Credit utilization, 20%. Total balances. Then they look for inquiries and available credit. That is one financial institution's for their credit card product. Just one. This particular financial institution has about 20 different credit card products. Some are affiliated with affinity groups. An affinity group would be like United Airlines or Hilton Hotel. They may have their brand on a credit card that's actually issued by ABC Bank. And each of those products have their own matrix. Each one's different. And the amount of risk that is taken with it is also compared to the costs that are associated with it. Because on those affinity cards, usually the name that appears on the card, they're ponying up money to the financial institution who issues the card in order to, as an inducement, to have their name on the card. But then there's also expenses that are associated with that, because those cards have benefits associated with them that are not available to other places. And when they have those benefit questions usually comes back to the financial institution, who has to filter through them and inform the consumer when they've got questions, complaints, or issues with the benefits section. Now, this is what I call an odds chart. This is one that was actually published by FICO back in June of 2014. They looked at this particular period, they looked at a total of 373,953 loans. Actually, that was not true. It's not loans, it's loan files, credit files. They looked at those. And of those, they determined that they had people who had adverse credit on 33,899 of those files. And those that had positive information was 340,054. Now, what you see here, and what's most important by them, let's see if I can get this thing to do what I want it to do. Yeah. If you have a credit score of less than 500, they say that 44.8% of those people with that score would have what is called a bad event. Now, what is a bad event? It depends on what kind of score you're getting. A bad event could be adverse credit payment history that's been over 60 days past due. It could be that it was a bankruptcy score, so it means these people filed bankruptcy in between the date that they observed the score and the evaluation date, which is 2 years later. The score that's being published there is based upon an observation that's 2 years old. Okay? Are you the same person today as you were 2 years ago? I know I was a whole lot heavier. And hopefully my credit's a whole lot has changed somewhat too, because over a 2-year period, I made payments. But what they're doing is they're looking at what happened to these files between this date and this date. Guess what? They publish them every month. They publish them every month. And the definition of bad varies from score to score. What are they trying to measure? Did these people file bankruptcy? Did these people have payment problems? What happened to them? On the other hand, if you look over here that people had a score of 800 or higher, they represented 14.9% of the population of these applications. They had the highest. and their odds of going bad was 0.3%. Okay? So if you had 100,000 loans, and all you were doing was looking at credit scores, you had 100,000 loans, only 0.3% are going to go bad. And if you're looking at it from an odds standpoint, that's a very important thing you know. Now, here's what we call a descending cumulative. If you had a score of 780 or higher, your cumulative odds of going bad is 0.4%. How many of you are familiar with something called a call report? Anybody familiar with what's called a call report, a financial institution call report? The financial institutions publish data about their finances, and on that financial institution call report, it's gathered by the FDIC, the NCUA, whoever their regulator is. And they have to, on a quarterly basis, send information in. And on that report, they publish what percentage of their loans are past due, 30 or more days past due, and how much their losses were for an interval of time, usually a quarter or a year. If you look at a bank's call report and you look up their charge-off rate on this call report, which is published, everybody's got access to it. You can get to it on a computer, okay? All you need is the name of your financial institution and maybe the routing number, which is usually on their website, because if you're going to do a wire transfer, you have to have it. You can figure out what their appetite for risk is. And if you see that, let's say that they have a 720 group for their best credit, you can say, 720 means they're willing to let 1.1% of those loans go bad, depending on what their definition of bad is. In this case, I know that number is way too low because charge-off rates, they like to keep them higher. I mean, they want the charge-off if they had a charge-off rate of 1.1%, the CEO would be on the list of going out the door. So this has got to be 30-day delinquency that they're looking at. But if you were at 640, like in the mortgages, 4.5% of those people who had that score or higher would go bad. Now, in the interval 640 to 659, that interval alone would have a delinquency rate of 11.4%. You see why it's important to keep your score high? Because if you higher your score, your risk is perceived as being lower.
Is 800 the highest? What is the highest?
850 on 850 on FICO.
So, Paul, in the last decade since 2014, the world's changed a lot.
Yes.
Has ESG changed the scope of what can be considered a bad event? It seems like in a decade, the definition of a bad event could change.
I think that institutions have changed their individual perceptions. The vast majority of them haven't moved a whole lot. However, they're getting more data. And the more data they get, the more refined they get in their analysis for how it affects their income statements and their balance sheets. So they're going to make subtle changes at the institution level. And I will tell you that people have increasingly employed more data analysis in their tactics to improve their bottom lines. But that's going to vary significantly from institution to institution. I've mentioned the fact already that the mortgages are under what they call tri-merge. I've mentioned the fact that they report to the credit bureaus multiple times. Now, we mentioned the types of lenders. that are out there that get that report. Payday, wrong button. Payday lenders have the most adverse impact on your credit. You know what a payday lender is? You go in, you need $200, and they'll loan you $200. You can pay $20 up front for the fee. You have to pay it back in 30, 60 days. That has become the bane of people who are on the edge from an economic standpoint. In this city, we have a lot of military folks, and the payday lenders have a history of preying on military folks. That's why there have been lots of legislation, some not enacted, some tapped down, because that's a powerful group of people, and they now have to disclose how much you'd have to pay them over a period of time. It's not uncommon to see APRs. If you calculated an APR, this is the way the bankers have to calculate APRs. You went in and you got a $200 loan for 30 days. You can see APRs as high as 700%. That's how bad they are, really. Finance companies. Finance companies include some retail stores. I should put some in there. Buy here, pay here, auto dealers, furniture dealers, and those that like to say, you won't have any payments. Your payments don't start until 5 years from now. That's a finance company deal, folks. Every time I see a rooms to go finance deal, I'm thinking, people don't understand. That's a finance company trap. It will hurt your score to have that kind of a loan on your books, more than if you just went and borrowed money unsecured and bought it outright. That will be more harmful. Credit cards are third most adverse. Banks, credit unions, mortgages are the least adverse.
Well, it looks to me like it would have been better for me to have financed those car payments through my credit union as far as my score would be, even though the interest rate might have been slightly higher. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Understand here, the auto dealers, the dealer finance deals for the big ones are in this group. They're in the group down here. There's really no difference in the ranking between a Ford Motor Credit deal and a Frost Bank deal in terms of the evaluation of it, okay? But what you don't realize, when people start appealing to your payment frequency, no payments for 90 days on these car loans. I've seen them, all the ads on there. Red becomes no payments, first payment 90 days, okay? Guess what? You're getting bought someplace else, because that will drive your payments higher. No free lunch out there, folks. Just not any. Credit inquiries can be problematic. If you go out on this month and you look for a credit card, and then 2 months later you go and look for a credit card, and 2 months after that you go and look for a credit card, that's 3 inquiries. Inquiries stay on your record for 2 years, okay? They stay on your record for 2 years and will adversely impact your credit if you have any inquiries. I had an inquiry that I did a year ago in January, and it's been dinging me 3 points on my credit score for the last 13 months. I look at my credit score every month. My financial institution provides me my credit score for free. It's a soft inquiry, it doesn't count. Okay? There are lots of other inquiries. Inquiries for employment. those do not count, but you are being looked at by they are scoring you if you're trying to get a job. If you're trying to get health insurance, they score you. If you try to get homeowners insurance, car insurance, there's not an insurance product in the world that they're selling out there that they don't touch your credit report and score you. Some count and some don't. But the ones that you're not getting actual cash from, those are soft and they don't count against your inquiry. So if you're out there looking for a job, go for it. It won't hurt your credit score. But if you're out there just playing, I'm gonna ride this 0 rate credit card for 6 months, and at the end of 6 months, I'll move over to another 0 rate credit card because they'll transfer your balance for free, okay? It's smart, but it hurts your credit score. And you just got to be cognizant of what you're getting into. Let's see here. Insurance companies. Keeping your credit in shape is good. Now, 5 minutes left. Hear ye, hear ye. This is very important. A few weeks ago, I gave you an assignment for homework. 2 weeks from today, you're going to need to bring your homework to class because you're going to fill out a piece of paper that calculates your personal cash flow. You're going to be able to see on a piece of paper in front of you whether you've got more outgo than you got income, or hopefully that you've got some room to play with. And then after we've gone through that process, we'll talk about what you can do to improve things. But we're going to spend the first 35, 40 minutes of the class talking about your situation. No one will see it but you need to look at it. That means you've got to know what your payments are, how frequently you're having to pay them, all that stuff, and don't leave anything out. That car insurance premium is an obligation. You need to include it. You don't pay it maybe every 6 months, but hey, it's still an obligation. The money you stick in your pocket, it says it's pin money. Guys, I know you've got your pin money. All right? We all carry our pin money around. That's the money that we're not accountable for, right? Yeah. It might get you a Coca-Cola. My number 2 guy at the credit union I worked at, he said his wife gave him $5 on Monday. And he got a kiss on Friday if he still had it. So that's the way he spent his pin money. But you've got to have this information or you will be a lost ball in high weeds when you come to class next week, okay? It's really, really important. And 2 weeks, and the week after that, 3 weeks from today, we're going to build your balance sheet. This tells you whether you are like the guy in It's a Wonderful Life, whether you're worth more dead or alive. Now, I can tell you the answer to that right now. You're worth more alive because you can change things. But at this instant, if you were to be struck dead, would you be better off dead or alive? That is the question we're going to answer 3 weeks from today. Next week, there is no class. There'll be a special presenter next week in the auditorium for this service, and he'll teach a combined adult class in the auditorium next week. These are going to be telling weeks that come to this. I suggest that you go back and reread, if you've not already done so, just read them this time, chapters 2 through 5 in the book. It would really, really help you to go through that process again. Because it's been a while since we talked about it, and because my class time has been abbreviated, I haven't been able to go in as much detail as I would have preferred. But that's the way life is.
So you have some books?
I had some books. They're missing in action. I don't know where they got to. I had a stack of about 12 or 13 more books that I left in here and last Sunday, and I think they got eaten during the chili supper. Really, I think somebody put them away thinking they were doing a good thing. I got to find them. If you will call me and let me know, I will personally deliver a book to you. I've got very little to do this week. All right? But if you'll call and let me know you need another book, I will get you a book after I find the books, okay? But I do have to find them first. All right? Anybody have any questions on the material covered this morning? I thank you for your time and attention.